Hey, quick question. What is realism?
Isn't that a type of art?
Oh yeah. Thanks.
We are so glad you came. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Hey, listen!
This is a short series of videos which will challenge the ways in which you see things. The series will be broken into 7 videos. Each video will explore a different subject. The description provides links to further learning, which I always recommend checking out. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, realism is a form of art characterized by its accurate and unembellished depiction of nature or contemporary life. As a graduate in fine arts myself, I've always been drawn to the high level of draftsmanship in realism. But for today's video, I want to talk about why this definition can be misleading. Let's look at this picture as an example. Who is this? Many of you will have rightly guessed Morgan Freeman.
Good guess, but actually no.
But is it really? This is in fact a hyper-realistic painting by artist Kyle Lambert. Let's use this painting of Morgan Freeman to consider the difference between reality and realism. Now this painting looks so real, but this is only a representation of reality and not reality itself. And that's just what realism is. Realism turns reality into an object, and that object can fool us into thinking that a painting is the same as the person it depicts. Philosophers of the 20th century were deeply interested in the gap between language and its meaning, and surrealist artists like René Magritte played with these ideas in their work. Magritte's painting, like the treachery of images, show that an image can be misleading. Is this a pipe, or is this the painting of a pipe? This is the illusion that Magritte wants us to pay attention to. In fact, he wants us to pay attention to it so much so that he puts at the bottom of his painting, in French, "Ceci n'est pas une pipe," which means this is not a pipe. He is explicitly reminding us of the difference between reality and realism, a painting from what it truly represents. Here is a further example of Magritte's work. In this work, he places a framed piece of cheese under a glass bell to further sell that illusion and to further call to us to remember that this is a painting. And you might be saying, well, this is all well and good, but what does this have to do with anything? And that's exactly what I want to talk about, because this concept applies not only to art, but also to the world around us. Think about the times when images or ideas have shaped the way we think, how they have limited us and guided us down certain paths. Sometimes we see through them, such as this ad of Kylie Jenner bringing peace to a protest with a Pepsi. But how many have slipped through? Let's take a quick look at another example just to get a better idea of how this realism can also be created through words as well. The false notion being painted here is the idea of a company being like family. We are easily fooled by symbols of representation, and they then have power over us. By stripping back that power and stripping back that illusion, we can come to understand this. We can learn to see beyond the image and question the reality that is presented to us. Are there symbols of representation in your life that hold power over you? By recognizing and examining these symbols, we can start to see the truth behind them and reclaim our agency. In conclusion, realism in art is not reality itself, but rather a narrow representation of it. The beauty of art is that it should invite us to question and analyze the world around us, to see beyond the surface and discover deeper truths, just as we saw in Magritte's work. And that's where realism in media can often fail us, because it is often used to trick us. As Noam Chomsky reminds us, the narrow nature of realism can often be abused in media to manufacture our consent, and even to rewrite history in some cases, as we will learn in an upcoming video. So the next time you look at a work of art or any image in the world around you, challenge yourself to see beyond its frame, seeing beyond its static representation and consider its real-world counterpart. Doing so will weaken the symbols and representations that hold power over you.
This is totally inaccurate. That's not
A pipe.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Magritte.
That's not.
A pipe.
That's some off-brand Etsy bullcrap.
Pipe.
Hey, man, calm down a little bit.
See, Link gets it. Have you ever heard of the concept of the Panopticon? This idea was first introduced by philosopher Michel Foucault, based on a prison design created by Jeremy Bentham in the 18th century. In this prison, a guard at the center could see every single prisoner at all times, making it impossible for the prisoner to have a private moment. You may remember it from such movies as the Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, this design marked a shift in the way we think about controlling society and punishment. But what does this have to do with our lives today? Well, just like the prisoners in the Panopticon, our lives are becoming increasingly more public and visible. With the rise of social media and the internet, privacy is becoming a rare commodity, and this change is affecting the way we live and behave. Are we changing ourselves to fit into the image we present on our social media accounts? Are other people's social media posts making us strive to live up to their seemingly perfect lives? Are we, as a society, lulling ourselves into becoming residents of the Panopticon? When we turn ourselves into images, we're doing ourselves a disservice. Just as we talked about in the previous section, we narrow ourselves down to a two-dimensional version of ourselves and disallow ourselves the complexity and depth that make us unique individuals. If we don't question this trend, we run the risk of normalizing it and becoming trapped within the walls of our own personal Panopticon. And it's not just social media. We now have TV shows that showcase other people's lives.
Obviously dating your old boss.
I was wondering why I wasn't getting listings, and then I was like, oh yeah, it's because I'm not fucking my boss. That is rich coming from her. You know what? I am fucking the boss.
Our lives are being shaped by the media around us. Many modern anxieties and depressions are oftentimes the manifestation of societal pressures. Those societal pressures ask us to fit within the frame of being constantly on display. So have we turned ourselves into images and reduced ourselves to these narrow two-dimensional versions of ourselves? It's up to all of us to reflect on this question and consider the impact it has on all our lives. We shouldn't let the Panopticon shape our lives, and we can retake control as a society from going further down this path. Foucault also examined how society labels human differences pathologically. He observed that we assign personalities to diseases, disorders, and illnesses, creating caricatures of the individuals who suffer from them in our world. This is particularly evident in the case of mental illness, which Foucault examined. He noted that doctors often categorize their patients as their illness rather than as human beings, and therefore the doctor was able to remove themselves from the suffering of the patient. The suffering of the patient not just being the ailment, but also our ableist society's repulsion to imperfection. This categorization came about during the Age of Reason, a time when European philosophers and scientists started insisting on putting clear definitions on all things. And again, they placed people into boxes. Reason has the flaw of being cold and inhuman. In its hubris, it often makes the mistake of thinking it knows all. And so, in categorizing life, it often reduces incredible complexity to what stands out the most. This puts shame on the people with those traits for not conforming, and oftentimes means that our knowledge of these traits is hindered by the unwillingness of people to admit they have them. As a result, we continue to ostracize these individuals from society due to the distorted image we have of them. In reality, everyone is human first, and reducing someone to a narrow set of traits is not a fair representation. The concept of hegemony developed by Antonio Gramsci is based on understanding the power that ideas have in shaping our beliefs and actions. He believed that when the ideologies of the dominant class go unchallenged, it makes it easier for us to be ruled by our oppressors. Antonio Gramsci's ideas were so dangerous to the fascist government of Italy at that time that they arrested him and sentenced him to 20 years in prison. Upon his arrest, a prosecutor remarked, "For 20 years, we must stop this brain from functioning." During his time in prison, he was not deterred from using his brain, and it was during this time that he developed his ideas further, and these can be found in his prison notebooks. I highly recommend his work for anyone wishing to cast off the hegemonic beliefs that hinder us. Speaking of hegemony, let's take money as an example. Some may believe that money is a medium of exchange, while some may say it represents the value of a person's labor. And it can, of course, be both. But is it really that simple? Let's consider deeper questions. Who really has the power to create value? Why do some people have more money than others? Is it really because they worked harder? Or do they use inherited wealth to control and profit off the labor of others? In that sense, money becomes something we need to delve deeper into. We need to analyze its origins, understand its implications, and how it is abused. Because when we leave it unquestioned, money is used as an incredibly powerful source of oppression. And this can be said for many other hegemonic beliefs. When we don't ask these questions, those ideas have power over us. But when we do question them, their power is greatly diminished. Consider our political system. Francis Fukuyama once claimed that Western liberal democracy was the end of history. What he meant by this is that it was the final possible outcome for our political system. But Jacques Derrida criticized this claim as a highly hegemonic belief, and rightfully so. In claiming it was the final iteration of political systems, it was claiming it could no longer be improved. And if so, then why aren't we living in some utopia? Is this the final stage of political evolution? By limiting ourselves to this belief, we cast off other options. And so, are we afraid of imagining a better, more equitable system because we've been told there's only one option? This sounds like something we need to start questioning. Similarly, our economic system, capitalism, has been left unquestioned. Many will claim that it won the war on economics, but I'd ask you to consider the situation we're in right now, where capitalism's inherent growth model asks us to sacrifice ourselves and our environment to benefit the few. Mark Fisher, in his book, Capitalist Realism, says that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than to imagine the end of capitalism. He is pointing us directly to its hegemonic nature. Capitalism subsists because we can't imagine its end. But by questioning this idea and exploring alternative economic ideologies, we can disempower capitalism. There are countless variations, and many reduce work, improve life, and eliminate the extraction of our natural resources. And you might ask, who is going to pay for all this? And that question, is the hegemonic belief manifesting itself. The reason we think we can't pay for these things is because in capitalism, there is a small amount of capitalists that benefit off this system. They extract all the wealth from the economy and don't recirculate it. And when they do, in the form of, say, philanthropic charity, it's a tax write-off. To go further into those charities, what they are doing is telling us who gets care and who doesn't, by using the money they earned by paying their employees less than their labor was worth. Many people are impoverished and sick working at the factories of billionaires, and those capitalists are creating the poor that they then throw their loose change at.
Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Finally, I want to touch on reason and modernity. Now, I'm going to be loosely riffing on Horkheimer and Adorno's dialectic of enlightenment. I want us to see it as a painting created during the Enlightenment by men privileged by the wealth of colonial oppression. They painted the edges of this painting during a time when they were profiting from colonialism. And so they painted themselves and their opinions at the center of reason and logic because they were unable to see how privileged they were. They, in a way, defined the developments accrued through colonialism, and more precisely, slavery and ecocide, as modernity. Colonial nations said, "Look at my works, ye mighty, and despair." Modernity announced itself quite proudly that it was better than all other contenders. But it was heavily left unquestioned because it had subdued all dissenting voices. And while it was developed as part of the Enlightenment as a means of overcoming religion, if it is left unquestioned, then does it not become a form of faith in and of itself? And that's exactly what Adorno and Horkheimer asked themselves. A big factor in the creation of the philosophy of this time was that these philosophers finally had time to think. Something that was possible because the nations these philosophers belonged to had enslaved others to work in their stead. Because modernity and reason were built on slavery, ecocide, and genocide, they require them to achieve their means. And even now, we have set the goal for all people around the world to reach for modernity. We call the goal a developed country, and those who must achieve it, underdeveloped countries. A developed country is again a definition that says, like Europe. Europe was built on colonial oppression, as were many of the original developed nations. So if a country wishes to become developed, it must utilize huge amounts of energy and resources to lift itself up to the level that colonial nations did by starting their own modernizing project. Let me try to illustrate this. Modernity was established thanks to the colonial abuse of other nations. They created hierarchies that allowed them to place their ideologies above others. Now, when modernity is declared the standard, the image of the future, how can other nations achieve it? Well, they need to follow in the footsteps of those who established it. Now, to drive home the point, take the fact that modernity was painted without the input of other societies, and see that other societies, untouched by modernity, have learned to live in balance with nature. They may not have extended their life expectancy or built glistening towers to their egos, but they also haven't driven us to the very real possibility of extinguishing all life on Earth in the same way modernity and colonial oppression has. And so as these nations start to modernize, they are often given the brunt of the responsibility for global climate change. We say that, for example, by using technology, we can solve the problem and have them reach modernity in some fantastic way. But the thing is that this modern technology is usually developed to make those original goals of modernizing more efficient, because it is shaped by the realism of modernity. So modernity acts like this funnel to make it easier, more efficient, and faster to perform the acts that created modernity. And let's remember what those acts are. Resource extraction through inequality. Today's episode was about seeing beyond what we have been numbed into believing is reality, but is in fact realism, a thin veneer of reality, and it narrows our thinking and makes us easier to manage. Let's not be easier to manage when we are being taken advantage of. These were a few concepts to help you see how to overcome the dominant ideologies which oppress, to see beyond the image they paint. All ideologies, if left unexamined, have the potential to be used by those that understand them to create false realities. Now, we have only scratched the surface on these means of being able to see through the veils of dominant realisms. In future videos, we will go into deeper dives into single subjects and offer you the opportunity to explore these theories through methodologies which you can enact in your own space, such as ethnography, literary analysis, and many others. I'll be creating case studies to show you how to use these theories and put them into practice. Now, if you've enjoyed these videos, I'd ask you to like, share. I'd love to hear your comments. If you really enjoyed it, consider supporting me on Patreon. This helps legitimize the amount of time that I spend working on these videos. And so that would really be helpful. Thanks.